Hey all, it's Blake back out in the garage here, dressed in my Sunday best, doing a little bit of work on the Aston Martin. So figured I'd give a little walk around as I'm redoing some electrical work, making a few improvements to the engine setup, as well as improving a couple small things on the chassis. After the initial build last year, I got a couple chances to get it put together and found a few areas to improve. So with that, I'm gonna switch around and we'll take a look at the wiring harness work. So we've got the engine and actually the entire drivetrain dropped out. So this will kind of give you a chance to see how everything's laid out. So the Vantage came as a transaxle. So what we have in here is kind of a conglomeration of C5, C6, and C7 components. So if we look back at the rear subframe here, this is the OEM Aston rear subframe. It has some very minor modifications. I did modify for some clearance back here and add some reinforcements, and there's a bar in the bottom that drops out. But this is a C6 Z06 transaxle, and then the inner stubs that I use and a base for the axle shaft is a C6 Z06 as well. So it's a TR6060 transmission. If we come in and take a look, you can see how I adapted the transmission mounts here. These are big pieces of 1/4-inch steel that have been plated and reinforced. Both sides are essentially mirrors of each other, and that adapts the factory Aston Martin pickup points back to the Corvette transaxle. And the poly bushings you see there are actually, I think, 80s square body Chevy body mounts that I modified to meet my needs here. So then if we come up forward, this is a torque tube that has been shortened. The work was done by RPM Transmissions, and then all the guts of it were done by the drive shaft shop. And then if we look back at the rear, it's not really a bell housing, but it's kind of a bell housing. We can see the clearance that I made here. This is where this is closest to the body, so that's been modified to make that fit a little bit better. If we come up forward here on our shift shaft, that's hard to say. This has been shortened and modified. And then there is a little bit of sound deadening up here. I'm actually gonna add a little bit more on here. Because of the setup of this clutch, you do get a little bit of gear noise that comes back in through the transmission or through the torque tube and shifter. So I'm gonna try to do a few things to quiet that down. It's just in neutral, you get just a little bit of gear rattle. If we come up here and look at the bell housing, this is a C5 torque tube. It's a C6 bell housing. Over here, I have a C5 bell housing that's gonna go in. It's not a huge difference, but there's a couple things in the hydraulic layout that is just ever so slightly different. So I'm gonna convert over to that. And if we look at our LT4 here, anybody who's watched these videos before has seen this setup before. But if we look at the front, this is based on a Holley accessory drive. So it is a Holley power steering setup and a Holley water pump setup. But then down here, I have moved the AC. Stock, it would be up here above the water pump. And I have it down here. I actually designed and CNC and laser cut a bracket that holds that in place, and then added the idler. If you look way back there behind the supercharger belt, there's another idler that keeps the accessory belt in the right spot. So that's all been handled. I did add a KTEC ported throttle body while I was at it. It's nothing crazy. It's just a OEM throttle body that's been ported. So it's what I think an 85 that's been opened up a little bit. And then I did add some plus 30 fuel injectors for the direct injection system. And then this does have a stage 2 cam from TIC Performance for A, little bit better performance from the cam, and B, to overdrive the fuel pump a little bit. My goal is to be able to run ethanol on it. I have a 2.3-inch upper and 5% over lower on that ATI. So then, as said, we'll come around and take a look at the harness. So everything is routed relatively close to OEM, but everything's been redone with mil-spec style wiring. I am still using OEM connectors everywhere, but then everything's done with Raychem heat shrink and then sealed. Then everything is labeled up so I can work on it. We come back through. Our main breakout is behind the engine. This is one of the few spots where I have some space in the engine bay. So I went ahead and did this. This will get tucked up a little bit. And then if you look here, I built a bracket. It's kind of just loosely set in place right now, but that'll help guide the harness as it moves through. And then if you look where the bracket, the zip ties will come into the harness to hold it. I added a couple layers of SCL over the DR25 just to help protect it, make sure that we don't wear through with those zip ties and cause any damage. And then if we come down and follow the harness, this is the end of it. So we are all fully concentric wound. And then down here is where we break out for our ECU. So that'll be the next thing to do, is get the ECU mounted in place, figure out the exact length of here. This is a little bit longer than it needs to be. And there will actually be a couple of other areas that'll split out here to connect back to the chassis harness, the PDM, and a few other things. So this will get split out a little bit. But the area where you see the heat shrink end here, this is roughly the end of kind of where it's gonna be and where all the joining and merging and splitting goes. And then everything else on the car or on the engine harness breaks down, and where it runs near the headers, I repurposed the factory heat shields to keep everything nice and safe. And then I think the only other notable modification, that is a map sensor that's mounted in the valve cover. That's just to give me an idea if I suddenly see a large increase in pressure in the bottom end. I'd rather put it in the pan, but I just don't have a great spot to put it in this chassis. And there was a hole here in the valve cover already that had to do with the PCV system. So I went ahead and put an adapter on there, and then that is a 2-bar, so -1 to +1 map sensor. So I can get an idea if I have any kind of appreciable cylinder pressure going on and log it. The only other sensor on the engine that's been appreciably modified, we can kind of see way down in there where the factory LS coolant pressure sensor was, right down there. That is a low dollar Motorsport combo sensor. So that is a pressure and temperature sender, and that'll let me know, if I start eating up a head gasket or something starts to get out of whack with my coolant pressure. That'll give me a chance to take a look at that. So outside of that, no other major modifications going to happen. The kind of fairly cheap stainless headers I have, discolored, look a little bit ugly. They shouldn't corrode, but I don't much care for the way they look. So I'm going to do a little bit of work to the nearest tube to the chassis, to the subframe on this side. Just clearance a little bit. So I'm going to move that tube just a touch. And then I think I'm going to take these in and get them Cerakoted just to make them look a little bit nicer. Everything near it is temperature protected. I'm not super worried about that, but just keeping them looking a little bit nicer would be great. And I think the only other modification I'm going to do is where this says LT4, I'm going to get a laser cut piece of stainless that has the Aston Martin logo on it, just to kind of mess with people, make it so that if you don't know, you don't know. So that's a little look at how things are set up right now and the work on the wiring harness. And next up, hopefully I'll have the MoTeC in place and the PDM in place and start getting that wiring done, and I'll do another update. So thanks for checking in, and hope everybody's having a great day. Bye.